The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration sits within the United States Department of Transportation and promotes and enhances safety regulations for millions of commercial motor vehicles on thousands of miles of highways. It's a lot of enforcement, it's a lot of highway, but also a lot of trucks. And when we're talking about new technologies like autonomous vehicles, the FMCSA is taking center stage in shaping policy that will impact how things are hauled. But what exactly does the FMCSA do? And how do government agencies view technologies that may radically change the face of trucking? Well, folks, it's your lucky day, because we're going to find out in this episode of Loaded and Rolling. Welcome to Loaded and Rolling. I'm your host, Thomas Watson. Now, if you've been in the trucking industry for an extended period of time, you may have heard of the FMCSA. From hours of service regulations, drug and alcohol testing, to even getting your CDL, the FMCSA plays a part in what and how you can operate. But unless you're in the Washington, D.C. Beltway, it can feel like a foreign place compared to the angry driver yelling at you due to running out of available hours to drive after waiting half a day at a shipper. But the longer you're in the industry, the more you realize that not understanding the workings of these government organizations can actually put you on the back foot when they make rule changes that can impact the very way you do business. So, super excited. Joining me today about what the FMCSA is and how they'll be taking center stage as the trucking industry is disrupted by autonomous vehicles is Wiley Deck, Vice President of Government Affairs and former FMCSA Deputy Administrator. Now, before joining the FMCSA, Wiley also served over 2 decades in the U.S. House of Representatives in various roles, including the Director of Oversight and Investigations for the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Welcome, Wiley. Excited to get to talk to you again, this time on a show.
Thanks, Thomas, for having me on. Good to see you again, and happy to be here.
I'm happy to be able to talk to you because after looking up your experience, I got to talk to you at F3, one of our events, and learning about the autonomous technology that Plus is working on. And then you have this amazing extensive experience also being within the FMCSA and on Capitol Hill. And so, you know, for folks like who are not as familiar, when you start at the FMCSA or the DOT, it's under the Department of Transportation, is this something where you see a lot of people who are maybe former drivers and it's like, I'm a driver, I'm going to go work for it? Or is this more of a situation where folks are saying, I'm interested in getting a career in government, this is one of the opportunities to learn more and grow?
So I think it's more of the latter, but there are quite a few instances where people are in the trucking industry, end up in FMCSA. So there is a mix of folks within the agency that have had that private enterprise experience and have carried that over into the agency.
And looking at as well, from how large agencies work and what they focus on. You know, the DOT works on quite a bit. We see the infrastructure bill was passed. They have quite a bit working on not only the infrastructure, but commercial motor vehicles. How coming from the FMCSA, how is trucking normally viewed? Is this something where we have a list of things we have to decide on what's important, or is there ongoing things that we have on the back burner? When you're looking at a large government agency, what are some of the big things behind the scenes that they're looking at?
Well, you got to remember that the goal of FMCSA is to promote safety in the operation of large trucks and buses on the road. And so their processes and how they decide how to advance regulations and enforcement measures and other tasks that they have to perform, how do they go about deciding that? First, it's from the top down. You have whatever administration is in office at the time does guide some of the policies that the agency and the department pursues. And within the agency, they're looking at a bunch of different performance metrics, right? So they're looking at what's happening on roadside in at the stops, what violations are predominant, where do they need to focus their efforts, whether it's the grant funding that the agency has, which makes up half of their budget, and where to assign some of the ones that they can target, whether it's for speeding or other aspects to help the states enforce federal regulations and also state regulations in making sure that these vehicles are safe on the roads. So they look at a wide variety of things. They get input from industry on what they should be looking at, but they also get directives from Congress saying you must look at this. And I'll throw out electronic logging devices. That was not something just cooked up within FMCSA. This was required by law by Congress, saying that you must implement electronic logging devices in the industry. And so they did what they could within the scope of the requirement to make sure that when it was implemented, it was done in a way that industry could adapt and adopt that new technology.
And I think that's a great point, because we're talking about adopting new technologies. The ELD one took quite a few years. Like, it felt like a decade, because I remember at US Express, large carrier, ELD integration was way earlier than when the mandate hit. Is that always kind of that push and pull between maybe the civilian elected head of the FMCSA? It depends on which party is prioritizing which topics, but then you also have on the other end the constant, you're doing research and you're getting input from various industry people. Does that ever feel like a real tough balancing act between which priorities from the bottom up and the top down?
Well, it certainly is. You have to figure out how to allocate your resources. And FMCSA really is, while it's a large agency within the Department of Transportation, it only has 1,100 individuals that work for the agency, and they're spread out all over the country. So they have a huge task in regulating. I think they're up to a million motor carriers right now. 96% of those are motor carriers with 10 trucks or fewer. And then once you move up the ranks to 100 trucks or fewer, you're at almost 99% of the industry that the FMCSA regulates, with only 1,300 people. So it's a huge challenge in making sure that they're enforcing regulations that promote safety, reduce not only crashes, but especially crash fatalities. But obviously, rules that are mandated by Congress that are signed into law take precedence over some of the other rulemakings. Just some of them are more complicated. For instance, speed limiters and automatic emergency braking. Those technologies, how do you address implementing those technologies into some older trucks? You've got the newer trucks with newer capabilities. So how do you do those types of things? So these are all partnerships that FMCSA also has to work with NHTSA on in advancing some of these rulemakings. So it can add extra layers of bureaucracy and the time it takes to implement those new regulations.
And that's what I'm curious about, because it does feel that the agency itself has rulemaking. You can make rules. The FMCSA issues rulemaking and gets comments. But if I'm lobbying, one thing I typically see a lot of is OIDA, Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association, and American Trucking Associations often are jockeying for various forms of regulation or deregulation. Do you see them typically targeting the FMCSA and DOT first, or is the goal to try and get Congress, like we saw with the ELD, to pass it and then have the DOT FMCSA implement it?
Well, it really varies on the topic. The larger the topic, they target Capitol Hill first. And the reason for that is FMCSA is, while it has a dynamic impact and dramatic impact on the supply chain and the trucking industry and how the economy moves goods, it's still a relatively small agency that doesn't get a lot of notice from most of government and most of America. Uh, so it kind of picks and chooses, where it needs to put its foot forward first, without being told to do something by Congress. So on big issues like speed limiters and ELDs and underrides and those types of things, all typically start with Capitol Hill. It's not something that FMCSA will tackle on its own without having that impetus from Congress pushing them to do something like that, or something higher up from the presidential level directing the agency or the department to do something along those lines.
And looking at Congress, you've served over 20 years in Congress and the House, getting to understand the various things. One thing I've heard is that the subcommittee, a lot of times you're competing and you want to make sure you're on certain key subcommittees. And so I'm assuming with transportation and such, is that one of the subcommittees that if you're a representative in an area that's heavily influenced by infrastructure, or what kind of, from your experience, who kind of gravitates towards your transportation and infrastructure related subcommittees to try and influence some of that upcoming, rulemaking and changes?
So you get a lot of the folks that are interested in transportation. That's going to be the most dramatic input you can have, not only for your district but your state, is the billions of dollars that are funded by gas tax, trust fund, and even the general treasury that come into your state. So the people that focus on transportation they're project oriented. It's not as much policy oriented. It's bringing necessary infrastructure improvements to your state or to your district. And the boss that I worked for on Capitol Hill for 22 years, who ended up being chairman of the Transportation Committee, he was a former real estate developer. So self-made, but he loved projects. He loved building things. He loved making sure that they were done in a smart, economical manner to make sure we were maximizing taxpayer dollars. So those are the types of people that you get into the Transportation Committee. People that want to see soup to nuts. You take a piece of land and then put in a new highway that increases the economic viability of an area.
I think that's really cool because a lot of times when we think of Congress, we only see a small select people who take the time to do the media appearances, the talking points, et cetera. But, behind the scenes working, there's 430 something members of Congress. I'm assuming a lot of it is a lot more mundane, which is structural. How do I improve things and trying to stay focused versus the few that are trying to, I guess, look for other avenues in advocacy.
Yeah, I think you see a lot of that. Unfortunately, I should say I not really see, because the ones that you're seeing are the ones that are out there, shouting to the heavens to get noticed. But you have a lot of workhorses there in Congress on both sides of the aisle that they may have different thoughts on how to get there, but they want to make the U.S. a better place. And it's just that, you don't want to watch sausage being made. It's kind of like the same thing in Congress. But there's a lot of working to advance, especially in the Transportation Committee, which is not as political for the most part as some of the other committees.
It reminds me of my class in political science and lobbying, and I heard the best lobbyists were the ones who were never noticed, and when HR 5-71-2 was passed in subparagraph 4, they got a 0.01% decrease on this one thing that they cared about. So when we're thinking of like the workhorse and behind the scenes, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of our infrastructure and transportation committees is you're trying to get adjustments in infrastructure for projects, but you also, I'm assuming, need to tack it onto a bill so that way it actually passes like we saw with the Infrastructure Act.
Yeah, correct. You're not, a lot of these things you're not going to get as a standalone bill or amendment. You just need to work it into the language, and that's where the Transportation Committee is works well together, because they can compromise, right? A unfortunately, we don't see that sometimes in Congress, but you got to work across the aisle with each other to make those compromises, because it's like a marriage. You're not going to get everything you want all the time. So you need to give up something to get a little something. So you may not get everything that you want, but you are moving the project that you're interested in and that you believe and your constituents believe and your state believes is a good project for advancing the welfare of the people that you represent.
And before we dive in on autonomous trucks, I'm curious, we talk about CARB, Clean Air Act, the Environmental Protection Agency. Is there ever a situation where agencies have overlap? Because I'm assuming if I'm in charge of like the FMCSA or DOT, and then maybe the CARB Act, that may impact the carriers and their operating authorities or may require me to do extra work. Is that something where when we see and we hear in the media about these pushes, are they talking to each other? Like, do you go out to lunch and with the EPA guy and like, hey, Bob, I know you're looking into this. Do I need to like worry about this? Or is it something that kind of bubbles up on its own and then you have to deal with it if it gets tacked onto a bill or something?
Unfortunately, it bubbles up on its own. There may be some minor contact between the two, and you want to add in not only EPA, but the Department of Energy. And they have various projects that deal with energy efficiency and fuel efficiency of large trucks and large commercial motor vehicles. So, there's some underlying conversations between the department and DOE, but it's not as intricate and as robust as you would think it would be.
So I feel like that's the opportunity for lobbying. The biggest thing I've always started with lobbying is half your battle is simply education. A congressperson is very busy. They have a lot of stuff to deal with, and so they really just want to know it. We're looking at autonomous trucks. I feel like we get a lot of overlap. There's the highway, there's the infrastructure, there's how are they going to operate, where the regulatory stuff. So like being at Plus now, having experience on the Beltway, what is kind of the current mood for this? Because coming from the outside, it feels to me like I read and we write about all these awesome things, but I haven't heard a lot about how yet we're going to, put it in terms of our current regulatory structure.
And you're absolutely right on the education part. And that's, part of my role that I'm in now is working to educate not only members of Congress, but also the federal regulators, the state regulators, the state legislators, and their staffs. And it's a constant churn, right? Because staff don't stay very long in either on the federal level in Congress or even on the state level. So it's a constant effort to try to educate new people as to what these technologies bring. But I think that what the viewpoint now is kind of skepticism, on even greater skepticism than before, on where L4 is going, when it's going to happen, with the requirements now of reporting to NHTSA any incidents involving ADAS and which is the assisted driving, advanced driver assistance systems, and the higher levels of autonomy. I think there's some skepticism, especially when you look at the new articles coming out about others in this space with the increased number of crashes and fatalities that are now being reported. There's concern there, and you start to see that FMCSA started their rulemaking on how to safely introduce these technologies into the system, and that was done. While I was at the agency we started it back in 2019, and they still have yet to move from the initial phase of rulemaking, which is an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, to the next stage, which is a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is a little bit more concrete and gives a better direction of what the agency is looking at in how they intend to shape the ADS venture into the system. So I think that's where we are now, is skepticism on the regulatory side, and certainly the skepticism on Capitol Hill, and where you see the legislation that is looking at being introduced, excluding trucks entirely from that provision. And us as a company and me working with others within our industry to kind of change that thinking by educating the lawmakers and their staff on what these technologies can bring and improve in safety when adopted appropriately.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about, because I always wondered if I need to get a hold of a congressman and I say, let's say I'm trucking, I'm trying to propose that I really want to have smaller skirts or something on the trailer. I know we need this much, but I'd like them to be 2 inches shorter. Do you have to try and get with the chief of staff, or can you just simply make a meeting with a congressperson? Or I'm assuming OIDA and ATA and other groups who are trying to propose interest, how does it start? Because I'm assuming that, it's not like you can just check their schedule and pencil yourself in.
Certainly not. You generally start with one of the staff members, one of the legislative assistants that handles that particular issue. You may want to also talk with the committee staff. But it all goes down to who are you going to approach? Like you said, there are 435 members of the House. There's 100 senators. So which one would best be the champion for your provision that you want to see added in? And you target appropriately. And that's what ATA does. That's what OIDA does. OIDA looks at all the congressional districts, and they find districts that have a large number of owner-operators within that district that are residing within that district. Then they'll approach that member of Congress and say, hey, you've got 26,000 of your constituents are truck drivers or related in the truck driving industry as owner operators. So then they start talking about whatever issue they want to promote to that member of Congress and their staff. So they work it that way. They try to create that nexus between the member of Congress and the issue, and that's through the voters.
And I heard another thing that is very effective in DC is I need to create myself a think tank. So let's say I have the Thomas Watson Institute for Trucking, and so can you. And so then I would bring in or try to get grants and bring in researchers. And I'm assuming the goal would be they would get then picked up on a staff as an expert, or maybe they'll be on a certain subcommittee as somebody that they call. And is that another way that we see, because I see it in defense and other groups where if you can't reach them, maybe you train a subset of folks who are experts in it, and then it just happens to also help because you're still informing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see a lot of back and forth from staff who work on Capitol Hill. I'll say the average lifespan of a congressional legislative assistant is about 3.5 years before they move on, because the pay is so low on Capitol Hill that you get the younger workers and they're working long hours, and then they see opportunities outside of Capitol Hill where they can make a better living, and so they jump, and so they go into lobbying, they go into think tanks and those types of things, and they become more experts on single issues or smaller issues that have a dramatic impact. And then they end up some of them come back to Capitol Hill and provide that knowledge base that they got on the outside. Now they're bringing it back to Capitol Hill. So there is some back and forth that you see, but unfortunately, the dynamics on Capitol Hill is that you lose some of those folks that get that experience on Capitol Hill that know how to get things done, and they end up leaving entirely DC. Just they move on back home to their home state and whatnot. So they're gone. They're no longer providing that knowledge and experience to advance worthwhile issues on Capitol Hill.
Last question, got a little under a minute left here. Let's say I do want to have autonomous trucks and I want them to be in, is there a specific person or a kingmaker I need to target, or is it really just putting in the groundwork and trying to work your way up to the staffs and decisions?
It's really putting in the groundwork, and we talked about the skepticism out there right now on Capitol Hill and the regulators, and this is one area where we are trying to address those issues by you've been in our driver-in system where we provide a very, very high level of automation, helping the driver do their job better, safer and easier. And we announced our partnership with Bosch and our recent with Luminar, where again it's providing that impetus to educate regulators and legislators that this is a great technology and can improve safety on our roads. It just needs to be done in a thoughtful way, and we collect that data and advance to that. Whenever L4 is going to happen, we'll be there, right? So it's about educating. That's the key point.
Perfect. Wiley, thanks so much for coming on. We're out of time right now, but if folks want to learn more about Plus, what's the best way to get in contact?
You can reach out to me, Wiley at plus.ai. Happy to answer any questions. And if I can't answer, I'll let you know and I'll find somebody that can.
Perfect. Looking forward to talking to you again. There's a lot to go through, and I'm excited to see where this is going. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Thomas. I appreciate it.
It's going to be a wrap for today, but you can catch this on Apple and Spotify, and we always do a live show every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Newsletter comes out Thursdays, freightways.com/loaded and rolling. Join us next week. We'll do it live.